And what if everything you've learned about creation isn't wrong, but simply incomplete? What if the Genesis story doesn't truly begin with the first human being, but with the last of several? Because the Bible, when read attentively, doesn't always say what we think it does. Among its most ancient words are verses we often overlook. Disturbing details, silences that seem too eloquent, clues that have led some to propose something that sounds impossible, even heretical at first. Adam may not have been the first man on earth. Think about it calmly. When Cain kills his brother Abel and flees, he says something very specific to God. I will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who finds me will kill me. Anyone who finds me, stop right there. If at that moment only Adam, Eve, and Cain existed, who were these others? Who was Cain really afraid of? And the unease doesn't end there. The text continues and tells us that Cain took a wife. Where did that woman come from? Then he settles in the land of Nod and builds a city. A city. Not a shack, not an improvised camp, a city. How does one build a city if their family was supposedly the only one on the face of the earth? These are not minor or modern questions. Each opens the door to even deeper inquiries. Could there have been intelligent creatures before Adam? Were they human? Did they have souls? Did they sin? Were they judged? And if they existed, why does the plan of redemption revealed in Jesus Christ seem directed solely at the descendants of Adam? Then another inevitable question arises. Could the fossil remains of ancient hominids discovered by science for centuries be evidence of these earlier humanities, of races that lived, multiplied, and disappeared before the man we know by name? These questions weren't born in modern forums or recent theories. Theologians, exegetes, and Christian thinkers have debated them for centuries, sometimes in hushed tones, sometimes with enormous controversy. Today, we're not going to speculate without foundation or resort to hidden mythologies or private revelations. Today, we're going to examine something very concrete, an ancient, uncomfortable, and fascinating theological hypothesis, the pre-Adamite theory of creation. And we'll do it in only one way possible if we want to be honest, basing it on the biblical text in its historical context, in its original language, and with absolute intellectual honesty, without mysticism, without inventions, just scripture and questions that can no longer be ignored. You're going to discover what might exist between the first two verses of the Bible, an interval that many read in seconds, but that perhaps hides the complete history of an entire civilization. And at the end of this video, I'm going to show you a specific verse from Romans that some scholars consider the clearest evidence of the existence of pre-Adamite humans. A verse that was always in front of us, but whose implication almost no one dared to consider. Prepare yourself, because after this you may never read Genesis the same way again. And wait, if this theory is correct, then everything changes. Not just what you believe about creation, but what you believe about yourself, about why Jesus came into the world, and about the very meaning of being human. In the next few minutes, we're going to explore 6 profound implications that arise from this theory, and I'll tell you now, the 6th is the most disconcerting. But before moving forward, I need to make a clear warning. What I am about to present is controversial. Most evangelical theologians do not accept this interpretation. You don't need to agree with any of this to be a Christian faithful to the scriptures. I present this theory because I believe that difficult questions deserve to be examined, even when the answers make us uncomfortable. So let's go there. If pre-Adamite races really existed, what does that mean? That's probably the question already swirling in your head. Romans 5 verse 12 says, "Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned." If Adam wasn't the first human, then why are we all sinners? Here is where the theory makes its central proposition. According to this view, those pre-Adamite races did not possess an eternal soul. They were not created in the complete image of God like Adam. They could be intelligent, yes, even violent, but without eternal moral consciousness, without the imago Dei. Their acts weren't sin in the biblical sense. Think of it this way: when a lion kills a zebra, does it commit sin? No, because the lion has no internal moral law, no eternal soul. Romans 5 verse 13 says that sin is not charged against anyone if there is no law. If those races didn't have the law of God written on their hearts, then there was no imputation. They lived, died, and ceased to exist without heaven, without hell, without eternity. Stop for a moment and think about this. If only those who possess an eternal soul can be judged eternally, then many things start to fit. That would explain babies who die. It would explain people with severe cognitive disabilities. It would explain isolated tribes who never heard the name of Jesus. According to this logic, only those who were created with an eternal soul and full moral capacity face eternal judgment. That makes God just or more just. Now let's go back to John 3 verse 16. For God so loved the world. If other races existed, did Christ die for them too? The theory's answer is direct. No, because they didn't need salvation in the eternal sense. Jesus came specifically for the Adamic race, for the bearers of the image. Observe the detail. Jesus didn't become a generic intelligent being. He became human, Adamic human, direct descendant of Adam through Mary. The plan wasn't accidental or excessively broad. It was precise. Are you ready to go back to the beginning? But not the beginning you think, not the Genesis you were always taught, but to the silent interval between Genesis 1 verse 1 and Genesis 1 verse 2. A brief space in the text, but immense in implications. Perhaps the true secret of the origins of life on earth is hidden there. And why would all this be so? Because only in this way could Jesus fulfill a very specific role. To be the Goel, the kinsman redeemer, the one who doesn't redeem just anyone, but his own, the one who buys back his own family. Hebrews 2 verse 16 says it in a surprisingly precise way. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. The author doesn't mention that randomly. He mentions it because there is absolute specificity in the incarnation. Jesus came for a concrete line with a concrete purpose. And when you observe that line attentively, something starts to fit. If you add the genealogies of Genesis 5 and Genesis 11, from Adam to Abraham, you get approximately 2,000 years. From Abraham to Christ, another 2,000 years, and from Christ to today, about another 2,000 years. In total, about 6,000 years from Adam. Young Earth creationists stop there and say, see, the Earth is 6,000 years old. But the pre-Adamite theory makes a crucial distinction. It doesn't deny that chronology. It separates it. It distinguishes between the original creation in Genesis 1 verse 1 and the Adamic creation, Genesis 1 verse 3 onward. The original creation could have occurred billions of years ago. The Adamic creation, on the other hand, fits perfectly within those 6,000 years. And between Genesis 1 verse 1 and Genesis 1 verse 2 appears that silent space, that interval that could harbor entire geological eras, dinosaurs, ice ages, tectonic plates, worlds that arose and disappeared before Adam. This doesn't force the Bible to adapt to science, nor does it force science to submit to an extreme literalist reading. It harmonizes them without compromising the integrity of either. But now pay attention, because here is where everything becomes even more interesting. If a pre-Adamite world existed that was judged, then the fossils we find today could be remnants of that ancient world. Dinosaurs, mammoths, trilobites, species completely extinct, found in deep geological layers. When God restored the earth after that judgment, he created new forms of life during the 6 days of Genesis 1. That would explain why we find mass extinctions in the fossil record. Why does biodiversity seem to increase and decrease in waves? Why do creatures appear that no longer exist and never reappear? It wouldn't be random evolution. It would be cycles of creation, judgment, and recreation, all orchestrated by God. Who are we? But now the question changes direction, and this changes who you are. We arrive at the fifth implication. Does this theory affect our identity? The answer is no. In fact, it reinforces it. We, the descendants of Adam, would be the only beings in the universe created in the complete image of God, endowed with an eternal soul, capable of a personal relationship with the Creator, destined for eternity. There may have been intelligent life before, yes, but we are the children of the covenant, the bearers of the Imago Dei, the race for which Christ died. And suddenly, Psalm 8 takes on an impressive depth. What is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. Why would God care so much about a specific race on a small planet in a seemingly insignificant solar system? Because we are not just another species. We are the redeemable species, the species of the covenant, the bearers of the divine image. And now we arrive at the sixth implication, the strangest of all, the most uncomfortable. What about the inexplicable? I'm going to tread delicate ground here. If intelligent, pre-Adamite races existed, and if some survived the judgment in altered forms, could that explain certain phenomena that we today call paranormal? I'm not saying that aliens are real. I'm not claiming that UFOs are this or that. But the pre-Adamite theory opens up a disturbing possibility. Maybe some strange phenomena aren't visitors from other planets, but remnants of earlier terrestrial eras, or manifestations of spiritual dimensions interacting with the physical world. Fallen angels, dimensional echoes. I don't know, but it's fascinating that a biblical theory can offer a framework for thinking about the inexplicable without abandoning the scriptures. And now we arrive at the most important question of all, the only one that really matters. If all this were true, what changes in your life? What changes in your daily faith? What changes in the way you understand God, Christ, and yourself? And here is the true beauty of all this. Nothing changes, absolutely nothing of what matters eternally. You are still a sinner who needs salvation. Jesus is still the only way to the Father. You still need to be born again, be justified by faith, sanctified by the Spirit, and glorified in the resurrection. The pre-Adamite theory doesn't alter a single fundamental doctrine of salvation. It doesn't touch the cross, it doesn't dilute the gospel, it doesn't redefine Christ. What it does is expand your worldview. It frees you from the need to defend a 6,000-year-old earth against mountains of scientific evidence. It equips you with stronger answers to difficult questions about Cain, the giants, ancient civilizations. It harmonizes faith and science in a way that honors both without violating either. And above all, it invites you to worship an infinitely more creative, more complex, and more majestic God than our small theological boxes could ever contain. Isaiah said it with devastating clarity. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways and my thoughts than your thoughts." Maybe there are layers in the history of creation that we haven't even touched yet, and that shouldn't scare us. It should fill us with reverent fear before the greatness of God. You can reject this theory completely and still be a Christian faithful to the scriptures. But at least now you thought, you questioned, you expanded your understanding of what is possible within God's creative project. And maybe, just maybe, you'll never look at Genesis 1 verse 1 the same way again. Now do something with me. Open your Bible to Genesis, chapter 1 verse 2. I'm going to read you the text, and I want you to pay attention to a single word. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. Did you see it? That word may be the key to unlocking one of the greatest mysteries of creation. Because in Hebrew, it's not as simple as it seems. The original word is Haya. And here is what's fascinating. Depending on the context, Haya can mean two completely different things. One was an original state, something that was always that way. Two became a change, a transformation. Do you notice the difference? If the earth was formless and empty, then God created it that way from the beginning. But if the earth became formless and empty, then something occurred, something that transformed an ordered world into absolute chaos. But wait, because this gets even more intriguing. The expression formless and empty in Hebrew is tohu wabohu. And these two words together appear only 3 times in the entire Bible. Here in Genesis 1 verse 2, in Jeremiah 4 verse 23, and in Isaiah 34 verse 11. And now let me show you something deeply disturbing. In Jeremiah 4 verse 23, tohu wabohu describes the earth after a devastating divine judgment. In Isaiah 34 verse 11, it describes the desolation that would come upon Edom as punishment. Are you seeing it? Tohu wabohu isn't language of initial creation. It's language of destruction, of judgment, of something that was ruined. Then an inevitable question arises. Why does this state of chaos appear right in the 2nd verse of Genesis? If nothing had been created yet, what would God be judging? Think with me. Genesis 1 verse 1 declares, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." That's a complete, full, finished statement. Heavens and earth created, work concluded. But immediately in verse 2, the scenario changes completely. Darkness, chaos, emptiness. How does a God of order, of light, and of perfection create something? And in the next verse, that something is submerged in darkness? That doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. Unless something occurred between those two verses. Here is where what is known as the interval theory or the gap theory comes in. This theory proposes that there is an indefinite interval of time between Genesis 1 verse 1 and Genesis 1 verse 2, a period during which something catastrophic occurred, something that transformed an originally perfect creation into a chaotic and empty world. Now, before you dismiss it, listen to this attentively. This isn't a theory born in nighttime internet forums. It was defended by respected scholars such as Thomas Chalmers, a Scottish theologian of the 19th century, Arthur Custance, an anthropologist and theologian of the 20th century, and G.H. Pember, author of Earth's Earliest Ages, people with serious academic credentials who dedicated years of rigorous study to this topic. So, the question is inevitable. What could have caused a catastrophe of such magnitude? Many theologians point to a specific event, the fall of Lucifer. Isaiah 14 verse 12 expresses it powerfully. "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn." Ezekiel 28 adds disturbing details. It speaks of a being who was in Eden, the garden of God, covered in precious stones, an anointed cherub who was corrupted because of his beauty. Now connect the dots with me. If Lucifer fell, if there was a cosmic rebellion, if a third of the angels were expelled from heaven along with him, where did that war occur? Revelation 12 verses 7 to 9 gives us a key clue. Then war broke out in heaven, and the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. The battle was celestial, but the consequences directly impacted the physical world. Then a disturbing possibility arises. What if the earth, created perfect in Genesis 1 verse 1, was the battlefield of that cosmic war? And what if the destruction caused by that rebellion is what transformed the earth into tohu wabohu? If this is true, and I admit that it's a big if, but follow me, then Genesis 1 verse 3 onward wouldn't be the original creation. It would be a recreation, a restoration. God would be taking a world ruined by judgment and ordering it anew, preparing it for a new creation. Adam and Eve, the first humanity of a new era, post-rebellion. And now comes the question that won't easily let you go. If there was a world before, who or what inhabited that world? Were there intelligent beings living on the original earth before the catastrophe? Would Adam be the first man of the second creation, but not the first absolute human being to walk this planet? Before you dismiss all this as absurd, let me ask you one last question, a question even more disturbing. When Cain was exiled after killing Abel, a basic but unsettling question arises. Where did he go? The text is clear, to the land of Nod. And there, Genesis 4 verse 17 tells us something strange, something we usually read without dwelling on it. Enough. Cain knew his wife and built a city. A city. Pause there for a moment. Cities don't appear out of nothing. Cities require people, require society, established culture, infrastructure, organization. So, the question is inevitable. Who lived in Nod? Where did Cain's wife come from? According to the traditional narrative, at that moment there were only Adam, Eve, and Cain. So whom did he marry? Who inhabited the city he built? The answer you probably heard in Sunday school was simple. Cain married one of his sisters. But wait, the Bible doesn't mention any daughters of Adam born up to that point in the narrative. And even if we assume there were daughters, that doesn't solve the central problem. It doesn't explain the people Cain feared would kill him. It doesn't explain how an entire city could be founded. It doesn't explain why the land of Nod already had a name, an identity, and inhabitants. Unless there were other humans. Humans who did not descend from Adam. Humans belonging to a previous, pre-Adamic line. And if Adam wasn't the first absolute human being, but the first of a very specific line, the line of the covenant, the line through which God would establish his plan of redemption, not necessarily the first Homo sapiens to exist on the face of the earth, but the first with imago Dei in full, with an eternal soul with complete moral responsibility. I know your mind is racing. Now, I know this challenges almost everything you've learned, but don't dismiss the idea just yet. Hold on to that discomfort, because in the next part we're going to examine more evidence. We're going to connect more dots, and you're going to realize that this theory has many more layers than it seems at first glance. And remember the verse from Romans that I promised you, the one that some theologians consider the strongest evidence of the existence of pre-Adamic humans? When we get there, you're going to have a moment of clarity. One of those instants when everything suddenly clicks into place. For now, hold on to this idea. Between Genesis and Genesis 1 verse 2, there may be more history than we were ever taught. An interval of time, a cosmic war, a lost world, and perhaps a forgotten humanity. The question isn't whether you like this idea. The real question is, what does the text actually say? And now that we've planted the seed of doubt, we're going to water this plant with concrete evidence from the scriptures. Because a theological theory only has value if it can withstand rigorous biblical scrutiny. And the pre-Adamic theory, as controversial as it may be, has much more support in the scriptures than many imagine. Let's start with the elephant in the room. Cain's fear. Listen carefully to his own words when God pronounces judgment on him. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Stop there and reflect on that statement. Whoever finds me. He doesn't say, my brothers. He doesn't say, my family. He says, whoever finds me will kill me. That is key. Some respond quickly, saying Cain was referring to the children Adam and Eve would have in the future, but that doesn't fit chronologically. Cain is being expelled at that very moment. He's not talking about a hypothetical danger 100 years from now. He's talking about a real, immediate danger. And if they weren't future brothers, then another question arises. Why does God put a protective mark on Cain? Genesis 4 verse 15 says it clearly. But the Lord said to him, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. Again, the same expression. Anyone who found him. God isn't protecting Cain from an imaginary threat. He's protecting him from real people present who could find him and kill him. That should already make us raise an eyebrow. But the most intriguing evidence comes immediately afterward. The text goes on to say that Cain went to the land of Nod east of Eden, and there he knew his wife and she conceived. Think about the order of events. Cain leaves, arrives in Nod, and there he meets his wife. The biblical language suggests that woman was already there. It doesn't say he went back to look for a sister. It doesn't say he waited years until a daughter grew up. He arrives and there is a woman and more. From their son, Enoch. The text says something we often overlook. Cain built a city. A city. Have you ever stopped to think about the real logistics of building a city? Cain alone can't do it. Not even Cain with a wife and a son. Cities require population, workers, organization, planning, an established social structure. What the text suggests isn't that Cain created a civilization from scratch, but that he integrated into an already inhabited region and eventually became its leader or founded a new urban center within an existing society that fits with everything we've seen so far. And now we go to another even more disturbing piece of evidence. The giants. Genesis 6 verse 4 says, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them." The Hebrew word that appears here is Nephilim, and pay attention to a crucial detail of the text. It says they were on the earth in those days and also afterward. That implies something very specific. The Nephilim didn't arise solely as a result of the union between the sons of God and the daughters of humans. They already existed before. That union produced more of them, but it didn't originate them from scratch. Observe also the distinction that the passage makes. Sons of God, daughters of humans, giants. Three distinct groups. If they all descended from Adam without exception, why is there such marked differentiation? Why speak specifically of daughters of humans? The language suggests the coexistence of distinct lineages of humanity in that period. The giants, the Nephilim, could be remnants of a previous creation or hybrids arising from the interaction between those lineages. And this idea isn't limited to Genesis. When the spies of Israel return from exploring the Promised Land, they report something unsettling. "We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." But here a serious problem arises. After the flood, how is it that giants still appear? The flood supposedly destroyed all flesh, except Noah and his family. Unless we are facing a story more complex than we usually admit. When we advance in the Old Testament, peoples described as distinct races appear again and again. Deuteronomy and other books mention the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Emim, the Horites. These are not described as simple, ordinary tribes. The biblical text presents them as numerous, strong peoples of great stature. Entire races considered giants, constantly compared with the Anakites. And then there is Og, king of Bashan. Deuteronomy 3:11 gives us a surprising detail. Only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. His bed was made of iron. It is more than 13 feet long and 6 feet wide, according to one of standard measure. 13 feet is approximately 4 meters. That was not a common human being. And note the expression, the remnant of the Rephaim. That implies that there were many others before him. All this begins to form a pattern. Phenomena that seem disconnected begin to align. Multiple lineages of intelligent beings coexisting on Earth. Adam would have been created as the progenitor of a specific lineage, the line of the covenant, the line through which the Messiah would come. But other lineages, possibly from previous creations or from survivors of the pre-Adamic judgment, coexisted with the descendants of Adam during long periods of biblical history. And this leads us to another mystery. Advanced civilizations that arise suddenly, like Sumeria and Egypt. They appear almost out of nowhere, with astronomical, mathematical, and architectural extraordinary knowledge. If there was knowledge transfer from older lineages to the newer ones, many historical enigmas begin to make sense. Now remember Isaiah 45 verse 18. "For this is what the Lord says, He who created the heavens, He is God. He who fashioned and made the earth, He founded it. He did not create it to be empty, but formed it to be inhabited. He is the Lord, and there is no other." But Genesis 1:2 tells us that the earth was empty. So, how do we reconcile these two texts? The gap theory offers a consistent answer. God did not create the earth empty in Genesis 1 verse 1. The earth became empty in. Genesis 1 verse 2 as a result of judgment. Jeremiah 4:23-26 paints an even more shocking picture. I looked at the earth, and it was formless and empty, and at the heavens, and their light was gone. I looked at the mountains, and they were trembling. All the hills were swaying. I looked, and there were no people. Every bird in the sky had flown away. I looked, and the cities were in ruins because of the Lord, because of his fierce anger. Cities in ruins. Cities that existed before the judgment. Cities of whom? If this vision reflects the state of the earth in Genesis 1 verse 2. Then there was civilization before the chaos. There were cities before Adam. I know all this may have shaken your certainties. I know each idea opens new questions, and that some don't have an immediate answer, and it's okay for it to be that way, because not every mystery is designed to be completely resolved, but to remind us how profound the work of God is. This theory doesn't pretend to close the debate or offer an absolute conclusion. It aims for something more honest, to show us that the biblical text is denser, more complex, and more challenging than we often admit. Maybe we don't have all the answers. Maybe we'll never have them in this life. But what is clear is this: the story of creation is not simple, it is not superficial, and it is not exhausted by a hasty reading. And when one contemplates that possibility, when one accepts that there may be layers that we don't fully understand yet, there is no anxiety or confusion. There is awe, reverent fear, and a profound certainty. God is bigger than we thought, and his work much vaster than we ever imagined. If these questions are shaking your way of reading the Bible, don't close this book here. Scripture is not exhausted by a superficial reading. There are layers, there is buried history, and there are truths that are only revealed to those who are willing to look deeper. Subscribe to this channel if you want to continue exploring what was forgotten, what was silenced, and what still waits to be understood. Activate the little bell, because each episode is an excavation into the very foundations of human history, and you don't want to miss what still remains to be unearthed. Here we don't seek controversy. We seek truth. And if the truth began before Adam, then we are just beginning.